Welcome to Emerging Tech Mastery, a show that demystifies cutting-edge technology like cryptocurrency, the blockchain, Metaverse, NFTs, virtual reality, the maker movement, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud, edge, and even fog computing. Strap in as we ride into the fourth industrial revolution. Emerging Tech Mastery provides actionable knowledge, regardless of skill level, from experts in the trenches. We piece together this intel in easy-to-consume media formats, processes, and procedures. See you in the future.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on another episode of Emerging Tech Mastery. On this episode, I have a very awesome guest. His name is Christian Noble. He is the co-founder of FutureFest, and he's also a software engineer. Christian, thank you so much for being on. It was really great meeting you at LA Tech Week, and I'm glad we're connecting again like this.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. Thank you. Yeah, LA Tech Week was such a blast. And to be honest with you, it was super fast. I was going to different events. I met you in one event in downtown LA. And then after that, I was at Beverly Hills in another event that I was going to. It was such a blur. It was great, though.
I'm glad I wasn't the only one because I really felt like information was coming at us really fast. And I mean,
Yeah.
I'll admit I've been a little rusty on going to events. So this felt honestly super refreshing and energizing. But I feel you. I feel like it took me a bit to kind of process everything. I don't know how it was for
Yeah.
you.
No, definitely. Basically, like you said, information coming in our head and then segmenting that information and where it all connects. And basically your mind is trying to see, okay, where you're trying to predict where does this go from here. I mean, that's how my brain works. Is okay, cool, I'm getting this information, input, segmenting it, and then the output, what is my own opinion about this new information I'm getting. And I felt in LA Tech Week, it was one constant information after the other.
Yeah, like one big stream and
Yeah,
then you're going to like organize
exactly.
it
And
later,
trying
right?
to put things together in your head and write it down somewhere. But yeah, that's how LA Tech Week was for
Love
me.
it. Well, let's start by learning more about you and tell us about your background and how did you get to where you are today?
I went to Cal State LA. I studied CS, and then I met a couple of my friends and even Steven in Cal State LA. We also did a lot of hackathons together. I was pretty much doing mostly iOS development at that time. Our first project was called Druseless, which was a startup that we created where basically it's an app where people can buy, trade, and sell books. Number one problem in college or university that you go to is a lot of the books are very expensive, and there was not a specific way to actually trade or sell books. We try to make our own platform called Druseless after Andrew. That's the name. Andrew Aquino is our other friend who is also a software engineer. It was pretty cool. It was basically a social media slash trading book platform where a lot of the folks there would definitely utilize the social media aspect of the app because they would just trade the books instead of buying the books. But we also had the buying functionality as well in the platform itself. But it seems like users were gravitating towards the social media aspect. Yeah, but over there, when we were doing the project, it was pretty cool. It was I was trying to see if there was some sort of database that had all the ISBNs. ISBN is pretty much the book scanner ID in the back of your book. It's called an ISBN, and I was trying to integrate the API into our app so we can get that book. For example, if there's a book that you're trying to get, instead of typing in the ISBN number, you can just scan the ISBN number in our app, and it will basically get that data, the specific book data, and then display in your app. So that's what I was doing. I was pretty much trying to connect things together. And then after that, I did a couple more stints in Silicon Beach as a software engineer. And then I was given the opportunity to work at Facebook, and that was an interesting time for me as well. And now I work for my friend's company called FutureFest, which is the company we started back in college, but which is pretty interesting. Now it's doing this type of sorry, it grew to this type of platform.
So, I'm glad you shared a little, Silicon Beach, Silicon Valley, all the different Silicon
Yeah,
locations, right? Has anyone said Silicon Mountain yet? I'd like to coin that if not. But
you should definitely coin that.
yeah, or maybe Silicon Hills if it's compared to Colorado, which is like super actual mountains. But yeah, like
Yeah,
the cool thing about what you're saying is, people say like, oh, I worked at Netflix or Google or Facebook or Apple. But what's really interesting
yeah,
about your background is you actually were working on mixed reality or VR at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So can you
yeah.
share a little bit about how that got your interest? Because I feel like there's so many people with your
Hmm.
background and coders or engineers that stay in that world and they stay kind of in
Yeah.
code and they don't come into the visual like design world. So how did you cross over with that? Because I feel like it's not the usual path for a lot of people with that background.
When I first met Steven in back in college, he had the DK1, which is the developer kit one, and we were trying to find out a way. And this was back in 2016 when Palmer Luckey still owned Oculus, and we were trying to figure out, okay, this is new technology. There's going to be so many early adopters in this. How do we make a platform, some sort of project in this new platform, new computing platform? And we decided, okay, we like music, we listen to music all the time, and we like EDM, and let's just try to recreate this experience, EDM or EDC experience, into this new computing platform. And yeah, we tried doing that, and we just started building using Unity, and we started building a whole bunch of really cool algorithms, which is one of them is auto detecting a lot of the music so it can display the lights. And yeah, pretty much it was just an idea that we were trying to get in early. And this was, like I said, not even the start of the VR, the metaverse space. It was just early on VR headset, and the technology wasn't even advanced yet. It was just very primitive at that point, and you really had to get a big rig with a really good graphics card and a really good CPU to even run the graphics into this in the DK1. So then that's how I got into this space. I was basically tagging along with Steven because he had that DK1, but I just wanted to build something with that computing
So
platform. Yeah.
that's really cool that you shared a little bit about what you were actually doing with the kit because it's one thing to just sort of experience it and play with the toys, but it sounds like you went
Right.
right for it and you were playing with the code and trying to actually like move the needle
Yeah.
right from the get go with trying new things. Like, was this within the SDK? You were basically poking around and thinking about, well, where could I, add more basically functionality if I'm understanding you right?
Right. It really took more of a trajectory, the project, when Facebook bought Oculus. That's when they really started bringing out Avatar SDK, which is the first avatar system that they created for the Oculus. And we started building our own avatars. And then we started building the hands in the avatar space into the virtual space so that you can interact with a DJ booth or something or give high fives in VR. And it was definitely an interesting time because at that time we didn't thought that Facebook was even interested in Oculus, and now that they bought it, it gave it kind of credence to it, and it's okay, yeah, this is going somewhere, so let's just keep building this. Our first version was called Plur VR. It's called Peace Love Unity VR, Peace Love Unity Rave VR, and that we submitted to the Oculus store. And then it kind of didn't get accepted, and then we got into the drawing board, and we basically had to solve some bugs, and now we're doing it in Twitch now, which is a different platform all entirely. But eventually, we'll want to port it over to the Oculus store.
So, just to kind of zoom out for a second, and then I'd love to dig
Okay.
more into all your insights there because there's so much to talk about when you build and you get into it, like even non-tech concepts like we were talking before we recorded. But yeah, like what is mixed reality? Because in
Hmm.
my remembrance, it started out as like VR, like 2017. I was kind of in the VR phase doing events and
Yeah.
showing off the HTC Vive. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, what is mixed reality? And tell us a little bit about how maybe it's shifted from just VR.
To be honest with you, I thought mixed reality was the Google Lens. I remember that. The Google Lens
Mm-hmm.
was pretty much this very expensive device that Google created. And then it had some sort of square
Right.
block in the right side, and they had the eyeglass piece. And when I think about mixed reality, that's what I thought about mixed reality, where basically it interacts with the world around you and gives you directions, or maybe tracks your heart rate, or maybe even tracks your, I don't know, your eyesight movement or something like that. And when you're looking at it, or maybe even track, it will pull up some sort of information about that person if you look at them. So that's what I thought about mixed reality. And it seems a lot of companies are going that way. I know the Oculus Quest, there's a lot of the Quest 2 specifically, there was a lot of systems that they've built in called the pass-through system, where you can actually go outside the boundaries that you've created and actually see the real world. And it seems a lot of companies are taking that approach. But going back to your question, mixed reality is pretty much just some sort of combination of virtual reality and augmented reality. I mean, that's my thing, my own opinion of what the definition is of mixed reality.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's really no wrong answer to it because it's sort of like, similar to I think how your first encounter with sort of one of the R's, right? With you called, yeah, the DK1 developer kit, first developer kit. It's that, that was the first introduction to so-called R, MR, XR. It was all VR. It was all, you're in the headset. There was, like you said, maybe a few projects like Google, and magically at that time was super quiet. And it was kind of like Apple was super zipped, quiet, nothing. So it was kind of like that's all you had. So that's why I also have a sort of VR first, and then now there's this new stuff coming in. What are some insights you've had from working in VR versus AR? And it sounds like maybe you've had a little more experience with that. I mean, do you see it as a whole different thought process or like developer mindset, or would you say it's kind of like crossing over now and everyone's thinking about everything? Or yeah, what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of these reality devices, as says, they're still very early. A lot of technologies haven't been built yet to have the compute power to run the actual graphics that people want to be immersed. That at that point, once we have that technology already built out, we'll be able to create much more immersive worlds. And like I said, Apple is pretty good at this, right? They don't talk about any of their products and then they just launch it. I think companies are very cautious about their development time, whether that's software or hardware, and they want to be realistic with their timetable and timeline. And I feel like a lot of companies are basically taking a route of cautiousness when they're developing this. I think Meta is very out there though. I think Meta or Facebook now, they just they just went out there and say, "Hey, this is the new computing platform. Please try to accept this." But I feel like technology has a big learning curve for a lot of people, right? A lot of people tend to learn technology very slowly, but it's getting better because technology is advancing, whether that's UX, UI, the design of the different technologies that people have created or companies have created over time. So they've definitely had a lot more research when it comes to people trying to learn new technologies. And you can definitely see that for the Quest headset. A lot more people are actually adopting it. And it was getting to the point where, wow, okay, this is actually getting easier. It's the interactions inside the virtual world was getting easier, and people were, yeah, seems like a really cool platform, and people just stick to it.
Now, one thing you mentioned about your time at Meta was you mentioned that there was a
Yeah,
lot of emphasis on open source, which really did surprise me because I would have expected maybe more like an Apple approach to things. Can you talk a little bit about how that mentality played out? And even today, I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of those contributions have been put out there in the public, maybe have even contributed to even Apple
right.
to some degree. So, what are your thoughts there?
My thoughts there was a lot of, like, for example, the Avatar SDK that came out not too long ago. That was open source, and a lot of people were able to, a lot of developers were able to use it to create projects of their own. I feel like Meta is taking an approach of an open source, like I said, an open source platform where people can make their code modularized, and a lot more freedom when it comes to creating new software. Whereas Apple has always taken a closed ecosystem approach. I remember when I was an iOS developer, a lot of their systems are very close. Like for example, Xcode was literally built into the MacBook Pro, whatever you or Mac device that you're working on. Xcode, if you don't know, it's an IDE where basically you can create apps. And the primary language of that was Swift. A lot of people use Swift. Now it's called Swift UI. But before that, it was like Objective C. It was a very closed system, whereas Meta is trying to take the whole open source approach where, okay, anyone can contribute to the open source project itself and create and try to break things. And then we'll see where we can fix them and create something new. It's very different, two different styles. And I don't know who would definitely, there's definitely two different developer mindsets that people have. A lot more people have closed mindset ecosystem like Apple, but some people like an open mindset like Meta or even Android, which is owned by Google. Yeah, it's very interesting. I feel both is very important, but at some point, some both of them will have to match together because the whole reason why virtual reality even exists is to have interoperability where different devices basically connect with each other and talk to each other. And that's the whole meaning of virtual reality.
Right. And it's interesting what you're saying. And, I don't know if you have any thoughts on
Hmm.
Magic Leap, but I was kind of, I'm kind of was like in VR for a bit, then kind of got
Okay.
sucked into crypto. So now I'm kind of like like you said, drinking from the fire hose, like taking it all in. And I was thinking, Magic Leap also seemed like they had a very like Facebook
Yeah,
like mentality where, if I'm not mistaken, we're building on Android. I
right.
heard open source mentioned, open ecosystems, and that's another interesting point you're mentioning about closed versus open ecosystem, because you have open source, but then you have, you know, closed and open ecosystems, and that's kind of like, we're getting kind of granular here. But yeah, I mean, do you find that Magic Leap also, again, they're a more commercially enterprise focused product, so in a way I kind of see them and Facebook
Yeah,
contributing to this in just very different ways, both under the same, code base, I suppose, or developer ecosystem, I guess. But yeah, I mean, do you
yeah.
see what Magic Leap's doing in a kind of a similar vein, where they were going for more like, just let's open this wide open to developers and see what happens?
I can't really speak to Magically per se, but if they are working towards an open source ecosystem, I think people will definitely gravitate towards that, especially developers itself, because they just want the freedom to hack things. But a lot of as I remember, a lot of people who work at Meta came from Magic Leap as well. They've definitely shared the same vein of open source, developer openness. It's definitely there in the same vein. I mean, Magic Leap is a great company. I feel like they've created a lot of advanced headsets, and I haven't really tried any of them yet. But yeah, if they're basically modeling after Meta, then they will definitely take an open source approach.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting to hear about a lot of people from Magic Leap came to Facebook or Meta Facebook, because I do think Magic Leap, it felt like I had heard their name, years ago, but then similar to Apple, they were
Yeah.
kind of being quiet too. But it's interesting that while they were
Yes.
being quiet, they were also supporting an open ecosystem. And hearing their CEO speak, there's actually some really great panels from AWE that are available for free online, and I just love getting in
Yeah.
the heads of these people, and you realize, wow, like they are actually fighting the good fight. And I didn't even realize that. So I felt, and then talking to you, I realized, oh, wow, like it's funny because it's, so easy to take pot shots at these big corporations. But one thing XR
Right.
has taught me is like, there's a ton of collaboration and cooperation, and it's like
Yes.
cross company. And I'm just thinking, how come you're not trying to keep it all to yourself? I mean, even Facebook kind of realized, yeah, we're big, but our strength is openness. And I wouldn't have thought that would have been how they did it.
I think Meta has realized that they need more developer openness to contribute to this new platform because the projects that are being made need really good developers to create them. I know, for example, Beat Saber was one of those projects that was very unknown, which is a really cool video game where you basically hit blocks. And that was the very first game I actually played in VR. And I was, wow, this is pretty good. And we need more people, developers like people from Beat Saber, who actually is now working for Oculus. Beat Saber now is owned by Oculus. but they kind of want more of those actual experiences, because I feel Meta is aiming for experiences and games. Basically, a lot of the platforms that they want to see are basically the video game route, where a lot of people are playing MMORPGs in VR headset or working out in a VR headset. Whereas Apple is taking some sort of professional approach. If you've ever seen the keynote, they're basically catering it towards the professionals.
Yes, it's kind of
Yeah,
fascinating what you just said because as you were talking, I was thinking, wow, like games are kind of like a closed loop ecosystem, or I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but I imagine like, like World of Warcraft or something of that nature. It's like,
yeah.
hey, that's owned by, I think, Blizzard, right? So it's like
Blizzard's, yeah,
Blizzard
Blizzard.
owns that. And, there's the whole like, in-game item, marketplace, which some of these companies are not a big fan of, and I kind of get it. They want to keep everyone in their thing versus, oh, I can like buy my way into the game. But
Exactly.
with that said, if I really am understanding you right, sounds like Beat Saber and specifically just the nature of so-called mixed reality is actually so different because it's like I was imagining like, wow, you don't even have to do mods anymore because it's like it's all one big mod because you basically have a bunch of people building on Beat Saber. Like, so instead of, oh, let me reskin Counter Strike or
Yeah,
Half Life and put Gary Coleman's face on everyone, now it's like that's a core part of the development to begin with.
yeah. I mean, very. You still mod a lot of stuff, right? Sideload a lot of, for example, sideload a whole bunch of music into your quests, right, for Beat Saber. But eventually, a lot of people are demanding this. Eventually, people want some sort of modularity into the actual games that they buy, right? There's a lot of video games out there actually that's in the quest right now that you can modularize to the point where you can just create your own games. And I feel like Facebook has a really good platform called Horizons World, which is their own platform that they created. It's already out too. You can try it out, where people go into this world and basically can create any different type of worlds that they want. There are subworlds within a bigger world, and you can actually learn how to code there too, where you can create some sort of world where, for example, your room, right? You can recreate your room, and you can add functionality in each object that you touch. For example, this mouse, that if you have a mouse in your room, you can have some sort of cursor function where you can move the mouse around inside the virtual world and will function like a regular mouse, and you can touch it with your virtual hand. So they have a platform like that now in Meta called the Horizons Worlds, like I said, and they're definitely taking an approach of, yeah, let's just build this world and see what people make of it. And that's what I like about that. It basically incentivizes people to create worlds that they can show off. I met a couple of old school developers from, I don't know, the 70s. I'm sorry, the 80s, that basically had the Quest 2 headset, and they created the old Mario games from like the 80s, and they added scripts. And you can visit this, it's in Horizons World. They added scripts, and you can actually run through the whole game, Mario character, in first person. Wow, this is pretty cool. Yeah, those are the kind of things that Meta is trying to promote.
That's crazy. You could get sucked into the Mario game like it's one of
Yeah,
those, TV
yeah.
shows where they get sucked into the movie or something. That's so wild.
Yeah.
One question I've had is about, you've mentioned like SDKs, like software development kits, but I guess I'm curious with the hardware versus software nature of, and I'm kind of
Okay.
making this super broad, with so-called mixed reality. Like you have hardware, right, that came out or it has come out,
Hmm.
and then you have like the software behind it. Did people more gravitate towards, okay, cool, I'll work with this hardware as is and I'll just tinker on the software? Or was there also, and again, I'm not, probably should know a little more about how these SDKs work, but was there any ability to
Yeah.
sort of tweak the hardware itself? Or was it more kind of like they were pushing people more towards the software side for development and such?
I'll definitely say they're pushing more people on the software side. They just don't want people to touch the hardware because it's proprietary at first, right? And they just want to push a lot of people that are developers into the software side so they can build on top of the hardware. And a lot of the hardware is very proprietary. It's because they've put out countless of research on the making the hardware itself, right? Designing the hardware, and they just don't want people to just mess with that. And this is very public knowledge. A lot of the research behind the hardware, they send the designs over, and this is from any company, to be honest with you. They They design the hardware and they ship it to manufacturing company in China or Taiwan to create the hardware itself. Yeah, sorry, going a bit granular on a bit, but yeah, they really don't want people to mess with the hardware.
Right. But then, like you point out, when the hardware plans, if you will, start floating around, then there probably becomes a little bit of a, we'll call it brain trust of, all these factories and stuff. I know there's probably, guardrails to make sure they don't sort of blatantly steal IP. However, I also kind of get the sense that once it's out there, like to your point about Apple, like Apple kind of knows like once it's out, people are going to take that thing apart and like reverse engineer it or
Exactly.
attempt to. And so I
Yeah.
kind of can see where they maybe, like you said earlier, they really take their shot when they're ready and they don't say a word a minute, a second prior to that, right?
Right. I think and I think the brand is what's really giving credence to the actual hardware platform itself because they've created really cool devices. And they own a lot of they mostly own a lot of the computer hardware space as well. They have the luxury and time to wait, right? Wait and see what other competitors are doing and just try to make one for themselves and introduce it like just the one more thing quote, you know what I mean? It's because they're so ahead in a lot of things, but not all of it. Android, a lot of companies like Samsung and Android definitely are ahead as well in some aspects in their devices. For example, it took a while for Apple to even remove the notch in their phones, or I think there is still a notch. It's called the dynamic island, right? That was a pretty big update. But at Samsung and Android phones already have no notches in their phones. They have integrated cameras inside their actual hardware, where it's seamless. You don't see a notch or anything. But like I said, what Apple is doing really right here is the branding and the marketing, and just having a lot of people just using Apple devices. So they're just so used to it. You know what I mean? That's what they're doing right.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point about how it's kind of like Apple's super ahead in certain areas and then kind of slow in other areas, and maybe vice
Right.
versa with Android and, like you said, Samsung. So that is funny how there is an interplay and knowledge sharing, but it's almost like, oh, like, like you said about the notch comment, Apple, it might be
Yeah.
another few years before they get more, like you said, seamlessly integrated. And I hadn't even thought about that, but now I know what you're saying because I can see it on the phone.
Yeah. I think what it is, it's a lot of it's basically Apple's very careful with a lot of their integrations of new features in their hardware. And it's really important that they nail it the first time. As of Android and Samsung, they have different iterations of the same hardware. They're okay, let's see if this one works. Okay, it doesn't. Let's introduce the next fix, the next model. And they're just popping new phones every couple of months or something like that. There's always a new Android phone, right? Because a lot of them are like, okay, this one doesn't work in our old phone. Let's just put it in our next phone, next line of phones and stuff. So it's definitely a different approach, and that's why I think Apple's very slow moving sometimes.
So you had mentioned, I like the hardware thread, and you make such a good point, which is, hardware is something historically that is controlled by some bigger players because it's like, well, like even look
Right.
at, crypto mining. It's like who's going to spend $15? Who's going to
Yeah.
spend $15 million on developing their own ASIC chips and such and things like that? Like I talked to a
Exactly.
guy who said, "Oh yeah, like those guys did it for 50 million, we only spent 15 million." And I'm like, geez, this is not accessible to anybody other than companies like that. So we had talked when we first met about chip makers, and you had mentioned
Yeah.
Qualcomm being more consumer focused and Broadcom being more commercial focused. So I thought
Yeah.
that was a really cool
Right.
commentary on sort of like, hey, here's some hidden players behind the scenes and like how they each have different approaches, almost like the like Meta and Magic Leap, like enterprise versus consumers, right?
Right. Yeah. For example, touch on Qualcomm a bit. The Quest 2, it runs on an XR2 chip, the Qualcomm XR2 chip, which is a mobile chip. Basically, it's a phone mobile chip where you can run really cool mobile graphics in your phone. And then Broadcom, they run a lot of devices in I don't think there's a lot of devices that run Broadcom in VR headsets, but it runs in a lot of their phones, a lot of different computers and laptops as well. I don't think Broadcom has ever partnered up with a lot of these big companies, but Qualcomm did. Qualcomm partnered up with Meta and Facebook to create new headsets. It's really depending on the consumer needs, right? I think Qualcomm sees a big demand in VR headsets in the future, so that's why they partner up with Meta. And Brock definitely has probably has a different type of business plan, and they're targeting something else, which I probably don't know yet. We'll eventually find out because Broadcom doesn't really share a lot of announcements on their hardware, if I'm not mistaken. But Qualcomm does. They have conferences for it.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, and you're totally confirming something that I'm seeing, which is
Yeah.
like I was just at Augmented World Expo, and Qualcomm was like, holy crap, it's almost like they're in like a league of their own because they're like the only, maybe not the only, but from what I perceive
Hmm.
as far as people of their caliber and size, they are kind of the only chip maker who is kind of coming with the people and sitting down with the people, and they
Right.
seem like they're just as eager to work with startups as they are to work with, you know, Google or Samsung. And I find that so interesting because, like you point out, a lot of these chip companies are very quiet, almost secretive.
They're very secretive. I think why they're secretive is like I said, they do a lot of research. They hired researchers from different universities to advance chip making. A chip is basically just a wafer of silicon, and it has these tiny modules inside the chip itself where basically it can run IPC, instructions per clock. Basically, it runs a lot of the instructions inside that chip. Making that chip takes tons of research and money to even develop. And that's why they're very secretive about it. But Qualcomm also has an open source platform in GitHub. If you check their GitHub, Qualcomm GitHub account, they have a lot of open source for software engineers. For hardware engineers, I've never seen an open source repository for hardware. That's probably in their own internal repository. And even at Meta, right, they have their own internal repositories for a lot of their hardware as well. It's stemming, like I said, it's stemming from research. It's stemming on time and money that they spent on making these chips and or yeah, researching these chips and making them. That's why they're so secretive
And
about
when
it.
you have stuff like crypto where they invented, you know, ASIC chips, and I was tripping out because in
Yeah,
2013 there was a post on, I know I'm dating myself here, bitcointalk.org.
yeah,
That was where they used to make all the like coin announcements and stuff. No kidding, dude. At one time there was talk of them open sourcing the ASIC chips, and then one day nothing. And you know why? Because they probably realized exactly what you're talking about. They were like, wait a minute, this is the golden goose. And it's like, chips are already valuable based on what you
yeah,
just said, but now this chip can
yeah.
sort of mine this magic internet money. Yeah, forget it. We're not telling anybody
It's
about this. So that's so interesting, man. You basically just,
yeah,
I think we just looked behind the curtain a little bit and realized hardware is a little bit
yeah.
of a
We did
secret sauce. That's why I noticed they push everyone to
right.
software. Software gets all the marketing, but it's that hardware that's kind of the hidden.
I'm sorry to go off your point, right? Governments are also secretive about their companies. TSMC is a big company in Taiwan, right? And Taiwan has this thing called, and I'm trying to get political here, but they have this thing called the Silicon Shield. The Silicon Shield is the term that the government coined, where basically we won't let anyone, the U.S. government won't let any country touch Taiwan, because that's where most of our technology is coming from, right? But China wants to take Taiwan for themselves for a lot of their for not just because it's part of China apparently, right? But it's also it's a technology hub of the world. It's the biggest manufacturing hub of semiconductors. Yeah, they basically have this silicon shield, and even governments are very secretive about it. It is basically what runs a lot of our defenses in the United States, military defenses like missiles that have chips in them, missile guided missiles with chips in them. And I would definitely say big companies are also secretive about them because that's what runs their companies.
You're bringing we're really getting on like a I don't mean to dawdle so long on hardware, but you're reminding me of
Yeah.
a episode I did where I interviewed an ethical hacker and I asked him, is it possible for there to be backdoors on a hardware level? He said, yes, there is, both on
Yes, there
software and
is. Yep.
hardware. So that's kind of terrifying because I was thinking about, again, like you said, not to get political, but there were these cheaper devices might have come out of China, and then governments are putting them in their facility, and it's like, oh, dude, you just like let these people into your operation,
Yeah.
by the way, and who knows what those devices are doing communicating to the mothership. So it's very interesting what you're bringing up. It's like so much security is involved and we don't even realize it, and I think we just uncovered all the geopolitics around protecting silicon manufacturing, and wow, that's I didn't expect that.
Yeah, and then there was this interesting read that I read online, and it was reported by TechCrunch. There was a former Apple engineer that actually stole a lot of the hardware tech from Apple and brought it to China for their autonomous car tech. Apple's trying to build a car to compete against Tesla, and this engineer stole a whole bunch of proprietary technology and brought it back to China. Fairly
That's
interesting,
like
right?
tech espionage. I know there's like corporate espionage and government, spy espionage, the usual, but
Right.
that's actually why am I not surprised? Because, like we talked about, during these periods of quiet, that's kind of the time where I'm sure like a lot of that happens because, these are formative years. Like you're talking about autonomous vehicles, like that's going to be in everything at some point. And so you're talking about almost like you could be the number one car company maybe even in the world with that tech, right?
Exactly. Tesla, I know, has been developing a lot of their chips in-house, right? And not being reliant on outside manufacturing. But there's a lot of things in Tesla's that still is still kind of experimental, to be honest with you. It's not a fully fleshed out product yet, Tesla's. That's why I don't have one. But yeah, it's just there's a lot of factors like charging the battery.
Well, this is when you know too much. It's like, dude, I know how screwed up electronics can become. I mean, you probably know way
Yeah,
better than anyone. It's like that's freaking terrifying, especially like you're putting so much power and control in the hands of electronics.
right. Our whole lives is basically in a digital space, right? Even this cryptocurrency wave of new crypto that's coming out. Because, like I said, I'm not sorry to date myself. Bitcoin was the only crypto that I knew when it was first growing up, when it was first starting out, right? And now a lot of people are putting a lot of their monies in different crypto. We are definitely putting a lot of our daily lives in technology. And that's why I think a lot of companies and a lot of even governments realize this, and they are basically trying to protect as much as they can for their people.
It's almost like silicon is like the oil of computing, right?
Yeah, I would say data. Data is the number one commodity right now that people are looking for, and then oil. But silicon is definitely up there. But a lot of companies like Google and Facebook, data is their number one oil. If that's the relevant term right there. It's because it what runs a lot of their companies. It's for advertising, right? They sell a lot of the data into ad advertising companies. They run a lot of data into machine learning models, and they use it for research as well. But it definitely is data.
Yeah. Yeah, data is the new oil. I've seen that headline somewhere, and I guess just noticing like how seriously they're taking hardware. Plus, like you say, the data. So where the hardware pushes the data through is also, I'm sure, something they're paying attention to. And I mean, this is a great segue into another question I had, which is what are some enabling technologies behind XR? And I'm asking that broadly, like hardware, software, things that there's so much piping behind the scenes that most people aren't aware of. They just use it, right? Even me with my phone, it's like, well, there's so much happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think I want to go back to a thing called Moore's Law, where technology improves every 18 months. I feel technology, a lot of the hardware space, and going back to the semiconductors, a lot of researchers from different colleges and universities are trying to figure out how to put in more instructions per clock inside that chip to make it more faster and efficient. Once once companies are able to do that, they'll be able to create really cool devices. But going even further in the future, there's a thing called quantum computing, where a computer does not runs on ones and zeros and binaries. It runs on in a molecular level. Once that is perfected, and you can research this, there's a lot of people in Google that are actually doing research on quantum computing. They're basically working on a chip that is quantum proof, and basically it basically runs in the molecular level, and where everything is instantaneous. The ones and zeros are very instantaneous. And once Google finds out a way to commercialize that and puts it in consumers' hands, we'll have really cool, I don't know, transformer devices like from the movie Transformers, something like that. But that's towards the future. But like I said, Moore's law is basically you see technology advances every 18 months. But once the research is done from the university end, we'll have better devices itself.
And you made a point earlier talking about basically there's a limitation right now with specifically like AR. I think VR, like, yeah, we need our computer and like, your nice GPU, but it's like that's part of why I think the hardcore tech people are like, what? We got VR. Why do we need all this other stuff? And I kind of can agree with them in a way because it's like, oh, well, for us to have AR and like everything's so small in these glasses, it's like you're almost forcing like it's like you say that's in the future, but I can see what you mean about once we hit, again, this was said so many times at the conference, inflection point. So once we hit that inflection point, it's going to be like almost like all software, right? Because it's like the playing field's kind of leveled, like everyone has
Right.
amazing hardware. So now what's
Hmm.
the game? The game would be basically software development and perhaps, AI machine learning that's being thrown around a lot, but from what
Right.
I understand, software is the end game. Maybe that explains why there is, frankly, some crazy exuberance on the part of like, dude, there was this guy from Snapdragon. I was like, I want what he's having.
Yeah.
He's very excited. But I know why
Yeah.
he's excited because once this tech, as you said, kind of levels out, maybe Qualcomm knows, like, look, like that point you mentioned is going to hit. And then what is it? It's going to be all developers
Yeah.
and software.
Exactly. And these are the people that are doing research on theoretical levels, right? A lot of even computer science, a lot of the computer science field is very theoretical. There's a lot of theoretical math, theoretical physics that is being developed for us to get where we are. But once we solve different issues in the theoretical level area and actually put in actual hardware, it's pretty much a level playing field, and people will basically have to create really cool applications on it. I remember in VR, a lot of people are building, like I said, first of all, video games, right? Video games was the biggest draw for virtual reality. But the Vision Pro, for example, a lot of people will definitely build apps on top of the Vision Pro. It probably won't be called iOS development, it'll be probably called Vision Pro development or something like that, where a lot of people will create apps, internal applications like Snapchat or something, or even Instagram, um, into the Vision Pro, and then you can just use it interactively inside this digital space. And once it's more mature, you can create really cool, maybe even biomedical applications inside a lot of these VR headsets. There is a race definitely for really good applications, not substandard, right? But really good applications that people are actually going to use in their day-to-day lives, whether that's for distractions or for medical uses or even productivity uses. But people tend to gravitate towards a lot of the productivity uses for Apple. I know that I would definitely be using the Vision Pro for iOS development or Vision Pro development. Don't coin that term. That might be what they introduce in the next conference. But it definitely is something. It's just a tool that people will use software as. And yeah, that's when the level playing field for hardware evens out.
Yeah, that's such an interesting comment about how it'll be more about experiences. And I've heard that's from pretty much every brand, many different talking heads. And it's kind of cool to think
Yeah,
about, maybe we are actually hitting a little bit of a maxing out, if you will, of hardware to where, everyone's got it. And now it's all about what are you building and, how good
yeah,
is it? And I'm just imagining, the
yeah,
Snapdragon, people and Apple, they're like, going to be waiting on the edge of their seats to see what other people build, which is so interesting because they've
Yeah,
built the highway, but it's like now who's going to use the highway, and we don't
yeah.
know.
But look at Nvidia though. Nvidia is doing something really, really cool, right? They're creating their own metaverse concept called the Omniverse. And I think Nvidia is the only player that can actually do this because they control the hardware as well, right? They create really good Nvidia graphics processing units, which alternatively runs ChatGPT, right? It runs OpenAI's ChatGPT platforms. You got to watch out for Nvidia though, because once they mature a lot of their, I'm pretty sure their hardware is pretty mature, because there's a lot of people that buy hardware, right? And they use the hardware, and these data comes back to Nvidia, and they just refine their hardware every time people use their actual products. But once they matured their Omniverse, it's called the Omniverse. Jensen Hua said he introduced the Omniverse. Once they've matured that, you gotta watch out. They might create some sort of really cool platform that we've never even talked or heard of out of the blue. And but that's what makes the technology world exciting, right? You got Nvidia and different other companies that are just not even also introducing a lot of their platforms. They're taking the Apple approach where they're not introducing a lot and they're just saying, okay, let's wait until other people, key players, introduce their platforms until we introduce ours.
So congrats to us. We went quite a long time, almost to the end before Metaverse was said.
Yeah,
So good job to us. And Omniverse, yeah, I kind of can see some branding there where they kind of wanted to maybe distance themselves from the term. But while we're on that's a great
yeah.
segue, frankly, because I'd love to hear a little more about your startup. But before that, what is the Metaverse?
For me, the metaverse, it's basically a term that was coined back in the 1984 by a writer who basically coined the term metaverse. That's my understanding of the metaverse is basically worlds that are interoperable from each other, and you can visit other worlds inside a bigger metaverse. It's very science fictiony, and that's my understanding of what the metaverse was. It was just an open digital world where people can interact and be themselves and play with different experiences and even build really cool worlds. Like Ready Player One was based on that book. Snow Crash, Neil Stevenson, yes, he coined that term metaverse, and that's what I thought. That's what I think about the metaverse, in my own opinion.
So you guys have done some pretty cool, like you kind of gave us a little hint in your first explanation of like playing with the DK1 Oculus, which is you said
Yeah,
EDC and basically like partying, having a good time, and I think that's such a fantastic thing to bring to Metaverse because I think there's there's a lot of grumpiness, about that term, and frankly, people I think that haven't maybe like taking a closer looking at it from afar,
yeah,
like I was there as well, so I kind of get where they're coming from. But you guys are actually trying to create a pretty cool integrated experience. So why don't you tell me a little bit about what you guys got going on with FutureFest and how you're looking to kind of bring the metaverse beyond just a term, and you're actually creating a real experience, frankly, a popular one, right? Because everyone loves,
right.
there's these festivals and everyone loves music, maybe in different kinds. But yeah, tell us a little bit about,
Yeah,
what your vision is there.
yeah. We're taking an approach of basically creating events that people are get excited for. The next event that we're throwing is called Pride Fest to celebrate people who are in the LGBTQ community. And we're very excited to just basically get people on board into our platform. And what's the better way doing that than music, right? I don't know if you've ever been to an EDM concert or EDC concert. There's definitely a different vibe and energy when you get there. And that's what we're trying to replicate into our platform itself. And when COVID hit, for example, a lot of people was stuck at their house, at their homes, right? We decided to port a lot of their stuff in Twitch so that people can actually interact with the world itself using Twitch. But of course, development time is it takes a while because ideas comes and goes. But what really excites me about FutureFest and this platform is how we can basically unite people and tell them what show them what metaverse is all about, because a lot of the metaverse concepts that's being thrown out there, it's by companies, big companies like Meta and Apple, right? And even Nvidia, but I'm pretty sure theirs is very closed. People who sign up for Meta just or Horizons Worlds, which is their own metaverse concept, just goes to Horizons Worlds. Or if Apple comes up with some sort of metaverse concept, people go there and you cannot interact with any of the products that Horizons Worlds or Apple's metaverse concept. What we're trying to do is we're trying to make everything open so we can get as much people inside our own platform. But of course, you can also traverse different platforms where you can go in different worlds, like Apple's world or Meta's Horizons world. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to promote. But of course, that takes time.
I'm imagining the game Portal,
Yeah,
or like kind of that graphic experience, and it's like, which portal would you like to go into? Like, you got the Meta, you got Apple's, you got
yeah,
where you are probably with the headset on. Because I was talking to the other co-founder about like you could have a sort of live experience to go along with it, because it's kind of like someone wearing a headset's kind of like another experience for the people watching. So there's like experiences upon experiences here that can get very
right.
interesting, because we're talking about social interaction here. And I think it's not like A plus B plus C. I think it's like
Yeah,
A and 1 and 6 and 9, and like those are intertwined, and like I could go from A to 6 to F to Z to like some other character
yeah,
that and I think that's so interesting. I mean, have you found, I mean, like you're saying, you guys' approach, from what I understand, you're kind of dialing in each event, really make it great. And I think that's so smart, because
yeah,
like we saw that, like it's like, 1990 graphics, Facebook stuff or Apple, like they showed some pretty good eye candy. But I do
yeah,
sense that, and like volumetric, like that other friend of that you met, he's in volumetric, and there's a little bit of that complaint, which is like, oh, like it looks so old, like 96. But
yeah.
people don't
So dated.
realize everything that's like working together, that this is actually like breaking new ground. Unfortunately, yes, it
Yeah,
doesn't look in 4K yet, but I don't. That's kind of part of what I'm trying to do here, is like, look at all the plumbing going on here. Can we at least appreciate that this is something new that's connected together? And okay, cool. It's still
exactly.
1996, but it's going to get better. It is getting better,
Right.
and will get better.
It is. A lot of technologies are built on top of each other, right? And it will, some of the technologies will get better, and once it gets better, it will basically be so immersive that people can definitely be in tune to the actual experience itself. But yeah, what we're trying to do for Future Fest is it's very conceptualized to the point where we're trying to get people united in music. And I think music is the biggest driver for this. Why we even started it was because we just like listening to a lot of this EDC or EDM music, and a lot of people are actually also enjoying it that way. I know a lot of the analytics states that people tend to go to one part of the platform, like so the beat house platform, or even the what we say the hardcore EDM part of the platform, because we have different stages in our world, and people gravitate towards each one, and they proliferate in each one of the stages depending on their musical mood. But yeah, that's what we're trying to do in this space, is we're trying to just introduce people to even new music, because we're also catering not just for the mainstream artists, because mainstream artists is pretty cool, but we're also catering towards the unknown, the up and struggling artists that still is trying to get their music out there. I know SoundCloud was such a big proponent of that, right? A lot of people use SoundCloud, an unknown artist, and put their music out there. We're trying to be like that, but in the metaverse platform.
That's so cool. Yeah, I like that you're combining sort of the social side, almost like even maybe not quite marketplace, but you did mention, your book idea, selling books online. That sounded almost marketplace like. So I kind of see how you're combining a few different models, frankly, and I'm sure there's plenty that maybe even you guys don't know as the founders, that'll be sort of shown as you go along the path. And like maybe one day, Live Nation or Coca-Cola's like, we want to be a part of that. Because, at AWE, I definitely noticed specifically those two brands were very interested in trying new things. And I just thought, man, it's almost like these corporations are more open-minded than a lot of us, like, because they're actually like, Coke. Who would have thought Coca-Cola would roll out an NFT marketing platform? Who would have thought They also did a generative AI thing, and I'm just thinking, that's pretty all in. Like they made a contest where they basically like dumped all their images into some kind of database and they let regular people come in and use that database and create generative AI art. And then they basically picked, winners, and they had a whole campaign. And I can't help but say, wow, like I need to like study Coca-Cola because first off, they're a leader in marketing, and as their global design presenter said at the event, they are in the business of experiences. And I was thinking, geez, I should have said that, because he asked the crowd, oh, what are we in the business
Yeah,
of? And I was like, experiences, raise your hand. I'm always shy at that stuff, but it was so interesting. And so I feel like you guys, could be a part of stuff like that, because I see, even with the tech not being, so perfect in 4K, tons of brands seem to be piling in. And, the more useful you are to a brand like that through this great experience, I think that could get very fun and interesting. And I love the music, of course, as well. So I'm biased
right.
to this.
It's all right. I definitely see that too because I know a lot of these non-tech companies like Coca-Cola or even Nike, right? Nike has their own metaverse department now too. Their development times are very slow because a lot of the people that are working in those companies are not like Unity developers or Unreal developers. They're regular software engineers, right? They have to switch their brain into making some sort of new experience, right? And that's where we come in, right? We can definitely come in and build something for those companies that people can gravitate towards to because they already have a built platform and we just can, it's very modular as well. So we can just replace things as need be. And Jimmy, the person I'm going to meet after this, he's a CTO, and Steven, he's a CEO. They basically designed it that way. Yeah, it's definitely something that we can definitely do for other companies, and we'll see if they can definitely partner up with us and make really cool experiences. Because I think at the end of the day, making cool experiences is it's what's all about, and seeing people loving the music.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know if we can really top that. I kind of want to, end here on a good note, but was there
Okay.
anything else I hadn't asked you that you'd want to mention or talk about?
N- No, not really. I mean, we talked about a lot of range of topics here, and I really love talking in the podcast that way. It opens up different new ideas.
Yeah, it's kind of like a live
Yeah,
collaboration in a way, because we're bouncing off each other, and then we're thinking about these things. And like I told you before we recorded, like I'll even just like we talked about hardware for a bit, because it was like,
yeah.
wow, this is really interesting how things are playing out. So yeah, no, I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
coming on and sharing your knowledge. I since I
Yeah,
met you, man, I felt like you really knew, like not only did you know it, but you kind of explained it in a way where like I feel like I got a piece of the techie
yeah.
engineer mind without
I
being that as a trained that myself. So
I try to, of course, I'm pretty sure everyone that listens to your podcast and even yourself, we've all taken math, right? We've all taken linear algebra, we've taken a lot of math analysis, even calculus. A lot of the technology that we interact today, it's a lot of math involved, right? If we go down to its very core basics, we just we just have a lot of the math is now basically encapsulated in software form, so we don't have to do the math in our mental heads. But yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to get interested in technology or get into software development, I mean, even hardware development as well, embedded software engineering, feel free, please pursue it because I think we need more people in this space to not just innovate and create, but to contribute. And I think that's what software engineering is all about, and that's what technology is all about. Is just bringing people together in unity because it's the only way we can progress into a better world. Yeah, that's my spiel.
well, I know you didn't mean to be
Yeah,
this, but you're quite the spokesperson for the engineering
yeah.
field. So yeah, where do I sign up?
Oh
Is it
no,
too late
no.
to become that? But no, I love your perspective there. And yeah, it's like this kind of conversation, makes these ideas more accessible. And I love that
Yeah,
encouragement for people, because that's exactly what I'm aiming to do here, is sort of like spawn some new possibilities in people's
exactly,
minds, even if they aren't sort of a trained and classically trained
exactly.
engineer. And even what I've learned from you, like you're branching out from areas that maybe a lot of other engineers aren't touching, like design and building sort of visual
Exactly.
experiences, which was often, I feel like, very
Yeah,
siloed. Now it's like, nope, everyone's a little bit of everything if they choose to be.
And I think I've always been that way. Sure, I studied CS back in college and stuff, but it was very theoretical, right? It's very mundane. But adding flavor to it is what gives it meaning. And I've met a lot of colleagues of mine in college that are just, yeah, I'm just gonna go work for the finance industry or something and use my knowledge there, or work for a car company, or sorry, yeah, automotive company, and use my talents there. But sure, yes, we could do that, but we could also create really cool ideas that you probably never thought of, and use your skills that way as well. I definitely encourage people to take your creativity as far as it goes, and failure is part of the process. And I think that's what gives it meaning too, as well, to be honest with you. We've failed a lot in FutureFest, and that's what sticks with you, is the failures and how you solve it. Yeah.
That's such a good point because I think that this is a healthy reminder that this stuff is hard and will probably be hard for a little while. And frankly, if it's not hard, then that means it's a polished product that's already mainstream and there isn't that same opportunity that we have in front of us here, right? So it's a very important point. Well, how can we get in touch with you and keep up, follow your work, and yeah.
Yeah. You can check FutureFest at futurefest.io. It's FutureFest.io. And you can find me in LinkedIn. It's Christian Noble. And I can also give it to you, Aaron, just in case. I'm currently building a website. I haven't done that in a while, to be honest with you, because I'm not really a person that creates websites and put myself out there. But usually I'm in LinkedIn. And usually I also have a GitHub account, so I can also give you that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And meeting you and your co-founder, Steven, was really fantastic. You guys are great guys. So highly recommend,
Yeah.
everyone check out you guys' work. And also you're just creating some
Yeah.
really positive stuff in the world. And I think we can all agree that
Yeah.
we need more of that right now and really
Yeah.
indefinitely. Yeah. So yeah, man, thank you
Yeah.
guys for what you're doing. And yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Aaron, for having me in your show. And yeah, hopefully we can do it again.
Yeah, much more discussions to come.
Of course. Of course. Thank you.